All right. Hey, guys. Welcome. My talk is on Tailwind CSS. With deference to Drew, I actually agree with 6 months ago, I would have agreed with 95% of what he said. Now I agree with 90% of what he said. But it's that 5%, which is what this entire talk is about, which is just ways to organize your CSS at its very core. So I guess I'll get into it. But first, also, how cool is got a mic and we're actually recording? This is awesome. All right, so just a little intro if you don't know. My name is Jon Jandoc. I actually work for Elizabeth Warren for president. I signed up to do this talk before I realized that it's a debate tonight, so boss is working and I don't know what's going on. I assume it's good. A front-end engineer at Joymode here. Hi guys. Before that, a million gajillion years ago, I was not a developer. I was a graphic designer and UI designer at J-Date. Yeah, a long time ago. And I guess that's kind of just to give some background. I started out doing design, and I got so annoyed at the software engineers not doing my design right that I just started coding it. And the more jQuery came along, oh cool, now I can actually do the animations and interactions and Ajax and stuff that the software engineers are totally doing incorrectly. And then I realized that I'm actually pretty bad at design, but I'm pretty good at doing front end. So that's the transition. So it's been a hot minute. I don't know how J-Date's doing. It's been a million years. All right, so to kind of go back into that, little history of styling HTML, back at least when I started at J-Date, for instance. So the good old days, this is how you would do layouts. Nice table with 100% cell padding, cell spacing border. Let's zero those out. Some call spans to determine things, and then you'd 300 pixels. You'd actually define that in here. No font size, 3 color. Yeah, spacer GIF. Thank you for noticing. Thank you for noticing. So that's my 8-pixel margin between the nav and my main body. You can all probably imagine how this is supposed to look. If you are unfortunate enough to work on HTML emails, it probably still looks a lot like this. So what's not nice about this? It's you're styling inline, tightly coupling HTML semantics with the presentation, and the semantics are even wrong. This isn't a table. This is a page. This is not tabular data presented, but we're using tables to lay things out, so that's bad. Lots of repetition. If I this is my text style here. If I want to reuse that, then I copy that font tag and I paste it. So this is if you're fortunate enough to have not built a website in the early 2000s, late 90s, this is what we used to do. So not great. And then CSS came along, and then we started writing things like this. Oh, whoa. Not like that. Back, forward. Actually, not like this. This is kind of a joke, but this idea here is okay, if we want to, we can inline styles. Instead of doing font size 3 color red, we can do color red font size 18 pixels. Okay, but we don't actually write stuff like that. We write stuff more like this. Wait, was there anything? Yeah. Okay, so we write stuff more like this. So we take this and we do it more like this. We've got a header, actual header element with whatever I had to. Notice I changed the header PNG. It was a header GIF, now it's a PNG, stay current. We've got our nav goes actually in a nav. Our main content goes in a main thing. The section of content goes in there. Footer class. So, the ideal here is now we take this, there's no styling in here, right? We just have classes, masthead, site nav, content section, site footer, all arbitrary came up with. But the nice thing is now we don't have to rewrite our HTML, right? The HTML is HTML. It's just a representation of content, as it should be. It's a hypertext markup language, right? So I've marked up the text in a way. And then the CSS classes live in a CSS file, and then I can put all my styling there, and you don't need to worry about it. So So yeah, that's what our classes are. They are a link between the HTML and the CSS. Unless you're using an element or an ID selector, which you definitely shouldn't do. Drew and I both, I think, on the same page on that. He had that in his link, but it is, you can't really see it. It's that classic mug. It says CSS is awesome on it. Anyways, this is a coffee mug. You can't. Anyways, CSS is great because now we're able to like take our presentation, separate it out from our markup. Awesome. It's very easy to write bad CSS. As Drew has gone into great detail, he has many rules for how to write good CSS, and I agree with a lot of it. It's very easy to create regressions. So like, I have a button, you know, button dash primary. I make a little tweak to it, and now I've actually accidentally broken something all over the site because everything has button primary. Or like, there's some weird, you know, maybe it's like dot masthead dot button primary or something, but like somehow something has broken that I didn't foresee because it was on some obscure page or even a main page, but I wasn't looking at that page. But I've somehow, the cascade of the cascading style sheets has created a bug that is broken, and I just wasn't looking at it. Oops. Pretty easy to do that. I'm sure everyone in here has done that. If you haven't, you haven't lived. It's very easy to be afraid of editing the styles because of that, and instead what you do is you just write more specific CSS selectors. So you end up creating really big, bloated style sheets. And then separation adds cognitive overhead. So it is great that now you've like taken the styles out, but now you have two files that you need to have open, and you're moving back and forth between the two, and you're trying to like, you know, manage that, and also keep in mind that you're not breaking other things that might be using that same button. And then another thing, naming things is hard. So there's, you know, what is a thing? It's a very philosophical question, right? Like, is it a masthead? Is it a main header? Is it a main footer? Is this header for an article like article header? Header article? Like header, item article header or something? Like the point is like naming things is hard. And anytime that you create a new element, a new component, you have to start thinking about like, what am I going to name this thing, and how is that name not going to conflict with something else? How's that name going to be consistent within a naming convention that's been created by somebody, hopefully, who's going to code review and enforce the naming convention? How, like, there's just so many issues. So to address that, people have created a lot of CSS methodologies. We've talked about BEM a little bit, block element modifier. I'm more of a SMAX man, or I was before, which is, I honestly can't tell you what it stands for anymore. But I was a SMAX man. Object-oriented CSS, sweet CSS, which is, don't remember what that stands for. Inverted triangle CSS. The point is there's that will, like, people will be able to enforce. All trying to address how to organize things, how to know how things are namespaced, how to prevent bloat, how to encourage reusability. But as I mentioned, enforcement is difficult. People don't do that. Like, it's really hard to enforce this, especially once you get more than like a couple people working on a project, especially if they're coming from different places and they might have different opinions on how to name things. UI frameworks also address this by just giving you a bunch of like pre-built components and ways and like things that are out there. And like, I love conventions, I really do. And there's a lot of like great things about Drew defining conventions about how Funkhouse builds things. I think that's awesome. UI frameworks also try to give you conventions, but what we end up getting, I mean, it's great. They give us consistency, they decrease repetition, they allow us to just take a slider component from like Bootstrap or something. If you don't know, there's jQuery UI, Bootstrap, Foundation, and this is Material UI from Google. And it decreases a lot of cognitive overhead. So like once you've actually learned how to do Bootstrap, then once you go to another Bootstrap project, hopefully it's kind of the same thing. You can just pull in the same Bootstrap thing, but like there's less learning how to do a thing. as opposed to if you come into something with no conventions or like someone else's rando convention, and you're like, all right, how does like developer A like structuring their work? Let me read the entire code base so I can discern what the consistencies are. And no one's perfect, so they probably don't have 100% consistency. They probably have like, if they're good, like 80% consistency. But I also hate UI frameworks. Why? Because it's usually too much bloat. You don't need everything that's in a UI framework. It's never a perfect fit for use case. It's not like how you want to do things. So you end up doing a lot of overriding. You end up like fighting the framework. They're highly opinionated about their API, their particular API. So like the way to pass in attributes to make, or settings to make a slider work in jQuery UI is not going to be the same as Foundation. It's not going to be the same as like a specific slider plugin that you download alone in its own way. So you know, you're going to be switching. You're going to be doing a lot of like code switching between different libraries. So what I've found with modern JavaScript frameworks like React, Angular, Vue, it's usually easier to just roll your own component library, unless like you're fine accepting the defaults, which is a perfectly good use case. Often, like if you're building an internal tool for something, then sure, just like use Bootstrap's defaults. But if you're trying to build something that's branded, that looks like your site, looks like your brand, you're going to have a little bit more success just like, in my opinion, rolling your own component library as opposed to fighting Bootstrap all the time. So that kind of brings us up to 2012, 2014. Component-based architecture, and I'm talking about React, Angular, Vue, Svelte, and probably a few other things, has changed the way, the way that we end up writing structuring like not just our CSS, but just structuring the way that we conceive of building pieces of UI. We're not building, well, it used to be a layer of like, all right, I'm going to write the HTML, then I'm going to write the CSS, and then I'm going to write the JavaScript. It's this like layer of like a core of content and semantics on top of presentation on top, with behavior on top. No, now we're writing pieces. So I write a button. This button looks and behaves this way. It has this semantic thing. It's just a single thing, right? Like a list element looks like this, and you can import it wherever, and it will look like this and behave like this. So we're now able to take something like, instead of writing a bunch of buttons and then adding a button class, we just make a button component, right? And the button component, if you're writing in Vue, you'll have a template where you're defining your markup. I'm going to use my whole laser pointer. How about that? Got a template, it's writing the markup, and then you've got your styles block here, and that's all your styles, right? Nothing here looks crazy. If you're, what I'm doing here, hopefully do the same thing. I'm writing a lot of my values to variables in Sass. In this case, Sass, but you can use it, however way you're trying to like pull out a lot of the like one-off number writing, right? So like background, color blue. So I have a color blue variable sitting in probably a variable SCSS file. Rounded-SM. So that's probably like a, like 4 pixel or something like that. Color, oh, I didn't add, call it color black. Call it color black, right? And then padding SP2, like I have a whole spacing system in my mind for what SP2 is, but that is a value, and you can, if you want to look it up, look at variables SCSS. All right, so this probably looks familiar to people, and this is great because now we're removing a lot of repetition by writing variables, and we're also like reducing a lot of the that cognitive overhead of like, where are my styles? What is my markup? Now it's in one file, which is great about Vue. If you're using React, you might have styled components where everything's on one file, but like we're reducing the distance between like the thing itself. I don't have to do in a large style sheet. I don't need to do a command find, command F for looking for this particular class. And you'll notice the thing here that I'm doing that is similar to what Drew did so like this component is called base button view. I call the class base button. in kebab kit. It can enforce all over the place, or at least I used to, so that I know that like, okay, base button is going to have the class base-button, so I always have that as a styling hook that I can work off of. Cool. All right, and then I've got like.
Just to be clear, that's unscoped, and you basically know you can get to that throughout the end.
Yeah. So in Vue, the root element, you can always style the root element of a component. If you want to like just with this, like, so this is a base button component file, and then this is another component button. It's a list of buttons. I can style my base button right here without doing anything crazy, because in Vue, the root element is stylable here. Deeper elements are also stylable. You just need to use /deep, which if you don't know it, you can Google it, but there is a way to style child elements of a component.
I do this all day, I just didn't realize it. You're saying that the parent element, you can scope, even if your CSS is scoped, you can scope from outside of that element?
Yep. Just the root element is the hook. Anything below that, it's not going to work.
I never used that. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, there you go. That's something.
Good thing I came.
So yeah. If you learn anything today, the root element of a component in Vue is stylable by the parent. And it's also anything deeper is stylable. You just need to use /deep. So if there's like,
At that point, it says inside that component, right?
I mean, it goes to what Drew was talking about of like, there's so many times when you need to override some child. And if that's the case, like, the nice thing about like /deep is it looks so weird that you're like, what is this? And then you realize it's a weird override, and then you know what that is, right? Like that there's enough kind of like cognitive shake-up that you're like, okay, this is something special. This is weird.
Yeah, it feels like the Vue version of
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, there's ways to work around that. Maybe you pass down a prop or like you do something, but like, yeah, that's definitely a like, when I pull out deep, it's just like, okay, something weird is going on, but that's fine. We can make it work. You don't need to, like, it's there. It's all possible. All right. So yeah. Anyways, the point is, your button is its own thing. When you want to use your button, you use your button, and you can use it in whatever context you have, right? Now, there's also I can't remember if this is a different slide or not. I'll go ahead. Okay, so there's also a distinction here that the way I like to think about styles. There's like two categories of style. There's the way a thing looks itself. So the base button looks like this, right? And then there's the way that it is laid out in relation to other things. So the way that the base button is in relation to other things, that's a concern of the parent. Don't put margin right in here, because it doesn't then you're going to have to overwrite it later on when it's not margin right. There are two concerns. Buttons look like this. The button list is going to arrange buttons like this, right? So thing itself, the way the thing is positioned in context of the parent. All right.
I think that's a huge organization thing that, like John said before, it's like how everybody absorbs, like such text on it that belongs in the button versus the thing moving that button around on the page that is outside of the component.
Yeah. And that's largely also why I was doing the convention of like the root element of your component has the class, the kebab cased version of like the component name. Because notice I don't write class equals base button here. I don't need to. It just knows that, right? So this is a good convention. But I'm going to go into also why you don't need that convention anymore. All right, so enter utility first classes. So this is how it was written, right? So we just looked at this. If you were to use Tailwind, this is how the component is now written. So what am I doing here? Okay, CSS class in here controls one rule of the CSS. BG blue, background blue. Rounded SM, rounded small. Text white, color text white, or color white. Font bold, P2, padding SP2, text center, text align center, hover, colon BG blue 400. Boom, see? So now this might look weird because we've talked, Druid talked about semantic CSS classes, and I'll get more into that later. But like, how much different actually is this, right? If this was our file before, this is the file afterwards. As far as like that button list goes, it doesn't really care, right? It doesn't matter. All of this is encapsulated in the base button component in these two same ways. The difference is I don't have a style block anymore. I've put everything into CSS classes. That actually, it might look like a mess, but from like an interface point, from the consumer of the base button component, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. In the same way that like they don't care how you write styles, you're just importing the button, right?
In that case, you can't override from the parent. You lost the base button override now?
Yes, that's true. But is it my next slide? It's not my next slide.
I'll let you get there.
I'll get there. All right. All right. Additionally, since things are just string names in class, we can do a lot better styling logic. There's one of the issues I think with Vue is that it's hard to get your logic from your template to your style block, right? Like passing things between the two, you kind of have to do some workarounds. It's a little bit more transparent here. So, like let's say we've got props, the theme of it, primary, secondary, tertiary, the things I go with. All right, so we've got our shared styles here: rounded, small, text white, font bold, P2, text center. If theme is primary, then we also apply these classes, right? Using Vue's very nice like object-based classes. If it's secondary, then we can apply these classes instead. And notice how like I can even do bgred space hover bgred 400. Like you can put any number of things in there if you want.
Just to be clear, those are triple equals, right?
Oh yeah, so I have a font with ligatures that So that's a triple equals. I don't think about that. That's one of those things I just don't realize that other people don't see anymore. Yes, exactly. All right, so block. So if this button is supposed to display as a block, then we'll add the class block, which in Tailwind CSS gives it display block. Easy. Opacity 75, you can probably guess is opacity 0.75, right? So if it's button's disabled, then we'll gray it out a little bit. And these are all things now like it's very clear. Merged what was presentation, like template and style both in a way are presentation within our components, like the ways of representing state, right? So now this is the distance here is literally reduced. So I don't actually need to like scroll up and down on the page, which if you worked in Vue a lot, I used to find was an issue of like, okay, I've got my template on the top, then there's a script tag, and then there's a style block. So I usually just open up the same file in two panes and have one scroll to the bottom and one scroll to the top, so I can actually like see stuff as I'm styling it. Well, now that's not an issue. It's all sitting within the class itself.
So is this?
Tailwind provides like pretty much a class for almost every CSS rule that you need, and several and most of the defaults that you will need, more than the defaults that you'll probably need. So like there's opacity 75, right? So there's an opacity 100, there's an opacity 0, there's an opacity 50, opacity 25, baked in as default. This is all documented, and like a lot of the stuff is pretty intuitive once you start to actually get into it. And it's all configurable, but I'll get into that later. All right, so styling logic, how state is represented in presentation is a lot clearer now, right? Because I don't have to arbitrarily to see what disabled looks like. Cleaner layout styling. So this actually goes to your question of now I can't, like, how do I style this was the old base button margin right sp4. I can just add the class margin right 4 mr4 to base button, and because Vue makes it nice and easy to add classes to a component, that just happens, right? Like that just gets merged in with the rest of the classes. So there you go. Like that's more or less lines that I actually need to write, and then it's
the class is now actually on the component, so it actually is outside.
yeah. So this is my button list, right? mr4 on the base button will get merged in with all the other classes that were here, in the same way that Vue does that anyways, with the root element. It'll add that class to the root element. React is not as friendly for that. You actually have to pass in class name as a prop and then join that string with your existing things. It's annoying. Vue is much nicer and easier for that. But all of this applies equally to like Angular, React, Svelte, Vue. It's all the same. This really is just a CSS framework. But yeah, so like the idea now is like Tailwind provides CSS classes that do pretty much every rule of CSS, almost every rule of CSS you need, and you can apply them specifically in as you need them. So now I can put in mr4, and I can remove mr4 and know that it's not going to break anything else on the rest of the site because the class is just right here, right? Like, what the consequences of removing mr4 are, as opposed to in the old days when I had like dot button dash list dot base dash button margin right 4, and I delete that, and then something on some unknown page breaks that I didn't write or test for, right? I know specifically what happens when I remove that. All right, meaty queries, also very easy to do. So you can see here, you can probably intuit what this looks like, what this is supposed to be based off of the class names, but if you don't know, this is a flexbox. Tailwind is built mobile first, so the initial applied class will be flex direction column, flex call. If you hit your medium breakpoint, MD, then it'll switch to flex direction row. It will align items to stretch in the column, and then when you hit the medium breakpoint, it'll do item start. So what was in a vertical row where everything is stretched out to the same size, now they are, in a vertical column, everything stretched out the same size. Now they're in rows where everything is aligned to the top. You can. It depends on you don't, I find you need to less, right? Because like when I used VueMQ, it was usually to selectively apply a class or not. Or like, you can still, so actually, I used VueMQ, and so if you don't know what VueMQ is a plugin for Vue where you feed it an object that describes what your breakpoints are, or an array that describes what your breakpoints are for your site. And then it will add to your global scope what the string name for your breakpoint is. And then you can do logic with that in your template. So there's lots of uses for that still. Like maybe just like, if you don't want to just hide something but entirely not include a component, that would be a use case for VueMQ. This is all just CSS, right? So if you want to give a completely different experience for a mobile user, then you'd probably use VueMQ. If it's just a presentation thing, then you'd use this. So MD is a Tailwind default. SM, MD, LG, XL, these are all Tailwind default names, and they're all pretty consistent. Totally configurable. All right, so the defaults, great and intuitive. I've shown you a bunch of class names. By looking at them, you can probably intuit what they are. But if you wanted to actually do something like overwrite them, so if you want to overwrite, you can just say like, so font family, my font family is sans. So if I do text-sans, or it's either font-sans or text-sans, that'll apply this font stack to that. Font size, so I can do text-SM, text-LG, that'll apply these. And this is an overwrite. This is an extend. So if I want to merge with the with the Tailwind defaults, so like maybe Tailwind has a good set of defaults for the breakpoints, but specifically for their small breakpoint, I want to overwrite that. So I'll extend their screen's breakpoint so that small is 375. They're red, they're gray, all their other colors are fine, but I specifically want to create a new color called Liberty, which I don't know if you follow Elizabeth Warren. We have this green color that looks like the Rust color looks like the Statue of Liberty. So we call it Liberty Green. Anyways, so that's Liberty Green right there. So this is, I'm just merging with the defaults of Tailwind here. Here, I'm overwriting them. So there are no other font sizes than what I'm writing here. Whereas with screens, I'm here, because it's an extend, I'm maintaining all the other defaults that are in there. There's also code hinting with VS Code, which is awesome. So it's an extension for VS Code. Once you install it, it reads your config file that you put together, and it reads what Tailwind is supposed to do, and then it'll tell you exactly what this value is. So you can start typing, and these are all class names. So I started, it doesn't say in there, I started typing BG. I don't know why I didn't capture that. And then it just gave me all the matching possible class names that would be for BG in Tailwind, which is great. And it'll tell you what that will. And then you can still use scope styles if you want. There's, we're not taking away your style block, or you can use your style block in general unscoped if you wanted to. But some things don't exist within Tailwind because it's too hard. So something like an animation, we got a keyframe right here. This is a keyframe for a bouncing ball. Also, if you want to actually move, don't like the long lists, take them and apply them using a mix that's built in with Tailwind and just put them in here. This way you have consistency of what your variable values are that you can use in your template or in your style block. So it actually you get to clean up, you get to remove a lot of the work that you're doing creating a variable CSS file. Now this is all stuff that lives within your Tailwind config file and can be used in several places. Yeah. So I mean, this is ignore this apply line, and then it's just normal CSS, right? So it's just a bouncing ball, has this animation. But what's the bouncing ball look like? Well, let me just use some Tailwind classes. It's background blue, height of 5. So it's I think that's whatever. Height of 5 with a 5, square, rounded full, and then it just animates bouncing ball. Append additional Tailwind classes specifically. Tailwind classes. Yeah, this is the Tailwind thing. Okay. Yeah, so if you don't like to put a bunch of classes here, then fine, you can write a class and you can just move it down here. Although then unless you have your linting set up right, which I haven't bothered to do, you'll get a bunch of linting errors because that looks weird. I don't know what's going on there. Yeah, well, extend in Sass sucks. So recommend not using that if you can. it has bad effects. Definitely, if this doesn't look appealing to you, listen to what Drew said and just don't necessarily them twice, or or just apply those classes. Reuse your classes, but don't extend stuff into one class like that. This is an exception. All right. So let's talk about semantics. What about semantics CSS? Class names really are just a style hook. They're again, to bring it back, they're a connection between your markup and your styling. The browser doesn't care otherwise. It doesn't know what header dash button dash dash primary means. It's meaningless. And most developers who are coming onto your project also maybe don't know what it means yet either. A lot of these semantics are really just precious to you, and that's where conventions come in handy, right? They're especially arbitrary and irrelevant in a component-based world. I don't need to write header dash primary dash dash button or whatever, because I can have a button component that I drop into the header, and then I can apply additional styling on top of that as I do in the case of it being a header. But these are all problems that we had earlier of naming things is hard. Naming things is very hard. Let's just not think about that anymore, and you've made things so much easier. Additionally, semantics are for HTML. Semantics are important, but they're for HTML. You want to use semantic tags, article, button, input. You want to actually describe to the browser what things are. To assist with that, we've got ARIA labels, proper header hierarchy, alt tags, disabled attribute versus using a class.disabled. Actually, to go back to what Drew said, use the platform. Use HTML as HTML is supposed to be used. If anyone puts a submit handler on a div, click handler, you're doing it. You have no basis to talk about semantics. Solve actual semantics first, and then we can revisit your opinion on semantic CSS. So yeah, semantic CSS classes don't actually do anything for actual semantics, for actual accessibility. Do HTML right, and this actually frees you from having to think about that, or it makes it it's more obvious, if a button is a button, then it should be a button. It shouldn't have the class button, right? Make it the thing it is. So yeah, to kind of summarize what I think about Tailwind, it's the right amount of framework. It has a bunch of classes that do things for you that you can use, that do very specific things, and they are done so in a very consistent, well-designed way. I think it's a really well-designed framework. It's configurable, extendable to be what you need it to be. You're not going to be fighting the defaults. The defaults help a lot. You can overwrite them if you need them very easily in a single JS file. It's there to just help you. It's called Tailwind because it's the wind at your back, right? It helps you go faster, and it's helped me build things much faster, which is awesome. Finally, I'd say it's mostly a replacement for methods of building CSS systems. So styled components if you're using React, BEM, object-oriented CSS, any of those. It's not a component library like Bootstrap or Foundation. If Bootstrap or Foundation works for you, great, keep using it. This isn't really for you. This is more for people who just need a way to write CSS better and who are looking for something that's better than BEM or better than object-oriented CSS. Also, I'd say in your case, if you're building something that's a global style sheet and you're not using components, this might not, maybe it works for you, but I find this really works for Vue or for Vue and React. I think this really lends itself well because the separation of concerns and the isolation of components is much nicer. Finally, Tailwind. It's created by Adam Watham. He runs the Full Stack Radio podcast. I've cited that a couple of times. Great podcast. Listen to it. He's a Rails guy that uses Vue and loves Vue. So he himself is a person that loves Vue. So clearly he'd want to build something that works for him. The documentation is excellent, really great. I love Vue also because it has great documentation. Because it's by a Vue user, the documentation isn't just for React, you'll find for a lot of things out there. It's hard being second place sometimes, or third place, I guess, if you count Angular. The documentation's excellent. It's interactive, you can see how things will change across different breakpoints and stuff. I've said this before, but the entire library is really well designed. It's intuitive. You probably saw some of that. It's just looking at the class names, you can kind of intuit what they do. And I find, again, it's a great fit with Vue, any component-based framework. It's a great way to just write less code and just move a lot faster. I've found that I don't need to, arbitrarily come up with a class name just to move something a couple pixels over. I'll still do it for you. And yeah, that's it. Thank you. All right.
Anybody have any questions?
Yeah. So if you had very shallow components, like the button, if you had that had a few different elements inside,
that. But like, you know, I find the more that they come up with conventions and like systems of doing things, the more that I push back on like design and like, okay, you did this one thing. Did you really mean to like move something that way or like use this different shade of purple, or was that intentional? Will this be a thing? Oftentimes, let's make it purple. Yeah. So you know, it adds friction in the right place, I think.
But so the answer to that is you would have to probably use a prop like the theme prop that you sort of showed.
Yeah, something like yeah.
Or you would just use regular CSS to do it.
Yep. Yeah. So there's a couple ways to address it.
Yeah.
But you know, the point is, more than anything, and I think like here, conventions are awesome. Conventions, and this removes a lot of the cognitive overhead, the distance, it's very transparent how a thing should work and what the system is.
What sort of size site have you used this on so far?
I mean, I've used it for Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah.
So.
Would you?
Out of many. Right. One of them is the app level global style block that applies down. Also, I should mention you didn't like resets. I also don't like didn't like resets. But just for like of sanity, Tailwind applies a reset to everything. So everything's very vanilla, so that it's very clear what you're applying. Yeah. Where it's you can pass in a block prop, that would be a Boolean. If it's true, then you apply the class block. If it's false, apply the class inline block. Other than that, like if you can imagine logic to write around that, then it's really just a matter of adding or subtracting a class name to the classes. So whatever. Oh, I did. It's hover colon thing.
It's interesting
Yeah.
to see that in the actual compiled CSS because it has a slash in it. Right?
Oh, is that what it looks like? I actually.
There's a colon in a class name.
Yeah.
In the CSS file.
Yeah.
It's very strange.
Yeah. Huh. I mean, that's one of those things, like, at this point, between like styled components, scope styles in Vue, all of this, I don't pay attention to what the outputted style names are anymore because they're all gobbledygook. So, but whatever magic they use to make it work, I appreciate it.
So on that note, on things like that, how do you do transitions? Or is it just like
Transitions you need to write normal CSS for. This isn't a replacement for Bootstrap kind of thing. They're working on building out some like bundled up components that will do component, like a whatever, like a grid system. So that's coming.
And what does it compile? I did some reading on this stuff. You can compile it where it will like only include the things you've used and stuff, right?
Yeah. So you want purge CSS is why I was so quick on the draw on that one. Purge It's in the docs. They recommend using purge CSS, and all that does is it just does a string match to see like, have we used this style, this class name anywhere in our code? No, drop it. So if you're going to do this, caveat, don't dynamically write your string names for your classes. Use a conditional or ternary or something. Like it won't know if you do $, $, curly bracket, variable, close curly bracket. The purge CSS doesn't know that you've like used that class because that's nonsense to it. So use the actual class names. Yeah.
For the configuration, you had a 2XL, I believe, for one of the font sizes that was in quotes, whereas all the others did not have quotes. Was that because it was 3 characters or start?
No, it's because you can't start a key with a number, but you can start a key with a string. So yeah, wrapping that in quotes just turns into string. And that just means like now I can do font -2XL. Yeah.
I want to just kind of half answer your question before Drew about props. Because I use tachyons, which is pretty close to better than Tailwinds. And that's pretty much how I do it. And in fact, I do kind of like your kind of default behavior kind of thing. Like I just kind of, I'll set like, let's say red is the default for the color of the button is built into it, but it accepts a prop that will override that. That's exactly how I use it. I mean, it's the classes with Tailwinds classes. And
it sounded like one of your reasons to use it was to get, like, you said, the presentation all at the top of the file, like the styles and everything going up there. But that seems like those styles actually live further away now because they're like in a base file or something somewhere. Do you find that you're trying to remember like what a certain spacer is?
Yeah, so that is a like, I mean, everything has its on ramp, right? Like I definitely have and still have the Tailwind docs up. I also have another tab usually that has like what my config file is, just so I remember what everything is. So yeah, I mean, there's always some kind of cognitive overhead, but that code complete is really nice. It helps a lot. It tells you what actually the thing is and gives you suggestions for like what the possible classes will be. Trying to think what like I struggle with the most, but usually trying to remember if it's flex-start or items-start. So I want align items flex start or whatever that like it's items-start. But that's one where I always have to be like I can't remember which one it is. So I'll get there. But I've also like it took me 3 years to understand to like internalize Flexbox. So yeah, tables will do. I'm still working on CSS Grid though. Yeah.
Quick question. So I've been finding in Tailwind, I've been using the kind of like mix-ins to just sort of like do general styling in your general elements. It's like your headers or your input elements. Kind of we're setting globals, and then when we need to do the overrides or specifics and building out and composing specific site components, is that like a good practice? You think? I always kind of wonder. It seems like it's a lot of repetition to kind of go over. So I'm like, globals, but then I'm kind of wondering maybe.
I mean, I'm anti-globals at this point. Like everything should.
As little as possible.
Yeah, like it's. I'll.
It seems silly to kind of like every input you.
Yeah.
Kind of like style that. You know?
When I'm writing a new page, I'll sit down and I like write like I'll just, I'll have page.view. It is the entire page, and as I'm going, like, all right, well, I'm reusing this a few times. That's its own component, or like all the logic that I need to like show the date for this box is its own thing. So I'll probably put the date logic in its own file and like the presentation in its own depending on how big things are. Just like if I can slice it up, I'll slice it up. But yeah, that's usually. I mean, like from a high level, I just start going and then breaking up into smaller pieces.
We had a use case this week that really made me think of Tailwind because, we have CMS and the user is very like sort of design forward client of ours, and they put a whole bunch of text, a whole bunch of images in there, and then they went because they're dangerous. They know some basic HTML and stuff, so they went in and put a whole bunch of inline styles on stuff in the editor because they wanted that image group to build to the left. They wanted this, all that kind of stuff. And then sent it to us, and then said, "Oh, but it looks shit on mobile."
Yeah.
And so, what's the solution there in a regular style?
Yeah.
Like you have to basically, they want utility classes is what they want. They want to be able to go in there and add like move this 5 pixels left, and then have it overridden correctly.
Yeah. Which is the nice thing about, so like I've had that with a client, I want to say like 4 years ago or something, where they wanted a lot of control over the content in the CMS, and they were like capable of writing some basic HTML. And like, all right, well, I can't plan around everything that you're going to do, but I built this on Bootstrap. Here's Bootstrap. All these classes here, they will work. So that I can point someone to documentation and be like, these will work.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, so you used to work with Bootstrap? That's what I was thinking about.
Well, oh no, I'm talking about like years ago. The main point I'm saying is like, again, like I love conventions. If I point someone now and be like, okay, like what you're gonna do within your parameters in the CMS, if you want to add margins and stuff, here's what they'll do, and you can do it yourself, and then like, God help you.
Have you ever had to like combine, I work on like a Rails engine, so it comes with Bootstrap, so we have to, certain things will already have that, so we have to work
Oh yeah, I ripped it.
within some of those parameters.
Yeah, no, I worked on a Rails project with Bootstrap, and I ripped it all out because I hate Boot. Yeah.
Say Devise, right? Devise is Rails engine.
Yeah.
Rip off the Bootstrap of Devise, and you'd have to override all of Devise.
I mean, you can use Devise as an API specifically, which we did at Joymode. We took Devise and we used that as our off API.
Rails engines
Yeah.
that are still I was wondering,
Yeah.
could you use Tailwind or something like that where you have to work with it?
Yeah, I mean, like in the end, yeah, you can always use Tailwind with whatever. It's just CSS classes bundled with, as long as you're using something like Webpack and to run post CSS, because that's important. Like this all of the magic that happens of turning all of these classes into things for the web are run in post CSS processes. So as long as you have that in your process, then sure, you can use this in whatever as utility classes, and that'll work. But I guess and I wouldn't stop you. But I will, like the underscore here is that this works really well for component-based architecture, because just the way that things organize themselves and how you can apply classes based on like parent to child versus like the thing itself. Yeah.
What about style guide? Do you have any sort of style guide going on that, or does it change how you approach?
What do you mean by like a storybook kind of thing, or like? Yeah, I mean, so what I have going on for my current client, who is Elizabeth Warren, I have so everything like your config is in it's just a JavaScript object, right? So I have all of this thing in an object, and like colors, I can just take. Here are the colors that we have available, and like it's pretty easy to template in Storybook that says if you want something to be blue, then you do bg-blue or text-blue or something like that, and just output that. So like because it's just an object in JavaScript, you can pass that around and generate stuff off of that, which is that's pretty much how we have built our Storybook at Warren. It's just like a lot of them is just me iterating over object entries, object.entries, theme.font size,
So what you're saying is you have a plan for that?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So what is your tech stack for the Warren website?
I've actually been writing a lot of React recently, which is too bad, but it's fine. It's fine. It's a React site on Node at the moment with Python backend as needed. Yeah. It's still REST. Yeah. I don't know how much I'm supposed to say, but no one cares. It's fine.
Are you writing back end too, or are you the front end?
I'm a front end person. You don't want me writing back end.